Vladimir Petrov stepped out of his black luxury car and looked up at the tall glass building. The sign above the entrance read, Elite Fitness Center, in bold silver letters. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket and ran his fingers through his gray hair. At 62 years old, Vladimir was not the type of man anyone expected to see at a gym. The doorman recognized him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Petrov," he said with a polite bow. "The charity event is on the 3rd floor." Vladimir nodded and walked through the marble lobby. His black leather shoes clicked against the polished floor. People turned to stare at him. He was famous all over the world for playing classical piano. His concerts sold out in minutes. His albums topped the music charts. But tonight, he was here for a different reason. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Vladimir pressed the button for the 3rd floor. As the elevator climbed, he thought about why he had agreed to come to this event. The organizers had asked him to make a speech about discipline and hard work. They said athletes and musicians had a lot in common. Vladimir was not so sure about that. When the elevator doors opened, the sound hit him like a wave. Loud music was playing. People were talking and laughing. The smell of sweat and energy drinks filled the air. This was nothing like the quiet concert halls where Vladimir usually spent his time. The 3rd floor had been turned into a party space for the charity event. There were tables with fancy food and drinks. People in expensive clothes were talking in small groups. But through the glass windows, Vladimir could see into the main gym area below. That was where his attention went. On the 2nd floor, he could see people working out. Some were running on machines. Others were lifting heavy weights. But in the far corner, something caught his eye. A woman was training alone in a small area. She had blonde hair tied back in a tight ponytail. Her movements were fast and powerful. She was practicing fighting moves on a heavy punching bag. Vladimir had never been interested in fighting sports. He thought they were too violent and rough. But something about this woman made him stop and watch. The way she moved was like music. Every punch and kick was perfectly timed. Her body flowed from one movement to the next without stopping. It was like watching a dancer, but much more intense. "That's Ronda Rousey," said a voice behind him. Vladimir turned around. A young man in a suit was standing next to him, also looking down at the gym. "She used to be the UFC champion," the man continued. "She was unbeatable for years. She retired from fighting, but she still trains here sometimes." Vladimir knew nothing about UFC or mixed martial arts. But he could see that this woman was special. Her focus was complete. Nothing else in the world seemed to exist for her except the punching bag and her training. Vladimir had seen this kind of focus before, but only in the greatest musicians. He watched as Ronda finished her training session. She unwrapped the cloth from her hands and wiped the sweat from her face with a small towel. Even from far away, Vladimir could see the strength in her hands. They were not delicate like a pianist's hands usually were. They were strong and powerful, built for fighting. But Vladimir saw something else. He saw hands that could create as well as destroy. He saw fingers that could move with speed and precision. He saw potential that maybe even Ronda herself did not know she had. The charity event continued around him, but Vladimir was no longer paying attention. His mind was working fast, forming an idea that seemed crazy even to him. He had spent his whole life around music and musicians. He could spot talent in ways that others could not. And right now, looking at this retired fighter, he was seeing something that excited him. Vladimir made his way downstairs to the main gym area. Security guards tried to stop him, but his fame opened doors even here. He walked across the gym floor, past people lifting weights and running on machines. Everyone stared at the famous pianist in his expensive suit, walking through their workout space. Ronda was packing her gear into a large black bag. She looked up as Vladimir approached. Her blue eyes were sharp and alert. She had the look of someone who was always ready for anything. "Excuse me?" Vladimir said. his Russian accent making his English sound formal and precise. "You are Ronda Rousey, yes?" Ronda looked at him with suspicion. She was used to people recognizing her, but this old man in a suit did not look like a typical fan. "Yeah, that's me," she said, continuing to pack her bag. "And you are?" "Vladimir Petrov," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. Ronda recognized the name immediately. Even someone who knew nothing about classical music had heard of Vladimir Petrov. She shook his hand, surprised by how firm his grip was for an older man. "The piano player," she said. "What are you doing in a gym?" "There is a charity event upstairs," Vladimir explained. "But I came down here because I saw you training. I wanted to meet you." Ronda finished zipping up her bag and stood up. She was tall and athletic, with broad shoulders and muscular arms. Standing next to Vladimir, she looked like she could break him in half without trying. "Okay," she said slowly. "Nice to meet you, I guess. But I'm done for the day." She started to walk toward the exit, but Vladimir followed her. "Wait, please," he said. "I have a question for you." Ronda stopped and turned around. She was not rude, but she was clearly ready to leave. "What kind of question?" Vladimir looked at her hands again. Even now, when she was relaxed, he could see the strength and control in her fingers. "Have you ever played piano?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that Ronda actually laughed. "Piano? Are you serious?" She held up her hands and turned them over. "These hands are for fighting, not for playing music." "I disagree," Vladimir said quietly. Other people in the gym had started to notice their conversation. Some were taking pictures with their phones. A famous pianist talking to a famous fighter was not something you saw every day. "Look, Mr. Petrov," Ronda said, "I appreciate that you wanted to meet me, but I really don't know anything about music. I'm a fighter. That's what I do." "That is what you used to do," Vladimir corrected her. "Now you are retired from fighting. So what do you do now?" The question hit Ronda harder than she expected. It was something she had been struggling with since she stopped competing. Fighting had been her whole life for so long. Without it, she sometimes felt lost. "I'm still figuring that out," she said honestly. Vladimir nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. "I have been playing piano for 55 years, he said. "I have taught many students. Some had small hands, some had big hands. Some were gentle, some were strong. But the best students, the ones who could really make music come alive, they all had one thing in common." "What's that?" Ronda asked, despite herself. "They had passion," Vladimir said. "They had the ability to focus completely on what they were doing. They had discipline, and they were not afraid of hard work." He gestured toward the punching bag where Ronda had been training. "I watched you for 10 minutes, he continued. "You have all of those things. You have more focus and discipline than most people I have ever met. And your hands—" He paused and looked at them again. "Your hands are perfect." Ronda shook her head. "Perfect for fighting, maybe. Not for piano." "How do you know?" Vladimir asked. "Have you ever tried?" The question hung in the air between them. Around them, the gym had gotten quieter as more people stopped their workouts to listen to this strange conversation. Ronda looked at Vladimir for a long moment. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of her old martial arts teachers. It was the look of someone who could see potential that others missed. "Even if I wanted to try," she said finally, "which I don't, I wouldn't have any idea where to start." Vladimir smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "That," he said, "is what teachers are for." The next morning, Ronda was having breakfast at her favorite cafe when her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and frowned. It was a number she did not recognize. "Hello?" she answered. "Good morning, Miss Rousey. This is Vladimir Petrov." Ronda almost choked on her coffee. She had thought their meeting at the gym was just a strange, one-time event. She did not expect the famous pianist to call her. "Mr. Petrov," she said, trying to sound polite. "How did you get my number?" I have my ways, Vladimir said with a small laugh. I hope you do not mind. I could not stop thinking about our conversation yesterday. Ronda set down her coffee cup and looked around the cafe. Other customers were eating and talking quietly. Everything seemed normal, but this phone call was making her feel like she had stepped into some kind of alternate reality. Look, she said, I think there might be some confusion. I'm not interested in learning piano. I was just being polite yesterday. I understand, Vladimir said, but I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? I am having a private concert at my home in 2 weeks, Vladimir explained. It is a very exclusive event. Only 50 people will be invited. They are all important people in the music world. Critics, other musicians, wealthy collectors. Ronda waited for him to continue, not sure where this was going. I want you to perform at this concert, Vladimir said. The words hit Ronda like a punch she had not seen coming. She actually stood up from her table, causing other people in the cafe to look at her. Are you completely insane? She said, trying to keep her voice down. I can't perform at a concert. I don't know how to play piano. Not yet, Vladimir agreed. But you could learn. In 2 weeks? That's impossible, is it? Vladimir asked. You became a world champion fighter. You mastered one of the most difficult sports in the world. And you think learning to play one song on piano is impossible? Ronda sat back down, her mind racing. One song? One song, Vladimir confirmed. Something simple but beautiful. I will teach you myself. Why? Ronda asked. Why would you want to do this? Vladimir was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was more serious. Because I want to prove something, he said. In my world, people think that music is only for certain types of people. They think you need to start when you are very young. They think you need small, delicate hands. They think you need to grow up around classical music. He paused. But I believe that music lives inside everyone. I believe that anyone with passion and discipline can create beauty. You have proven that an ordinary person can become extraordinary through hard work. I want to prove that an extraordinary person like you can do anything. Ronda felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was flattered that someone as famous as Vladimir believed in her, but another part of her was terrified. What if she tried and failed? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all those important people? I don't know, she said. This sounds crazy. The best things in life usually do, Vladimir replied. After they hung up, Ronda could not concentrate on anything else. She went to the gym and tried to work out, but her mind kept wandering. She thought about Vladimir's challenge. She thought about the look in his eyes when he had watched her train. She thought about the empty feeling she had been carrying since she retired from fighting. That evening, her phone rang again. It was Vladimir. Have you thought about my offer? He asked. I've thought about nothing else, Ronda admitted. But the answer is still no. It's too risky. Risky how? What if I'm terrible? What if I can't learn? What if I make a fool of myself? Vladimir laughed. Miss Rousey, you have been punched in the face by some of the strongest women in the world. You have fought in front of millions of people on television, and you are worried about playing piano for 50 people? When he put it that way, Ronda had to admit it did sound a little silly. That's different, she said. Fighting is what I know. Fighting is what I'm good at. Exactly, Vladimir said. You know what it feels like to be good at something difficult. You know what it takes to master a skill. That is more than most of my students have when they start. Ronda was quiet for a long moment. What song? She asked finally. She could hear the smile in Vladimir's voice when he answered. Something that will surprise everyone, he said, including you. The next day, Vladimir called again, and the day after that. Each time he had a new argument for why Ronda should try his challenge. He told her about students he had taught who had started later, in life. He told her about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with your own hands. He told her about the discipline and focus that music required, and how it was similar to the mental training she had done as a fighter. On the fourth day, Ronda finally agreed to meet him at his house to see his piano. She told herself she was just curious. She was not committing to anything. Vladimir's house was in the hills above Los Angeles. It was a huge white mansion with perfect gardens and a view of the entire city. When Ronda rang the doorbell, Vladimir answered it himself. He was wearing casual clothes instead of his usual suit, but he still looked elegant and sophisticated. "Welcome to my home," he said, leading her inside. The house was like a museum. There were paintings on the walls and sculptures on pedestals. Everything was perfectly arranged and spotlessly clean. But it was also warm and comfortable, not cold like some fancy houses Ronda had visited. Vladimir led her through several rooms until they reached a large room with windows that looked out over the city. In the center of the room was the biggest, most beautiful piano Ronda had ever seen. It was black and shiny, and it seemed to fill the entire space with its presence. "This is a Steinway Model D concert grand," Vladimir said proudly. "It is the same type of piano used in the best concert halls in the world." Ronda walked over to the piano and looked at it closely. The keys were perfectly white and black, arranged in the familiar pattern that everyone recognized but few people could actually use. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Sit down," Vladimir suggested, pulling out the bench. Ronda hesitated. "I don't want to break anything." Vladimir laughed. "It is a piano, not a glass sculpture. It is made to be played." Ronda sat down on the bench. It was the perfect height, and it felt solid and comfortable. She looked at the keys in front of her and felt a strange sensation. Her hands seemed to want to reach out and touch them. "Go ahead," Vladimir said softly. "Just press one key." Ronda reached out with her right index finger and pressed a white key in the middle of the piano. A clear, pure note filled the room. It was louder than she had expected, and more beautiful. The sound seemed to hang in the air for a long time, before it faded away. "That was middle C," Vladimir said. "The most important note on the piano. Everything else is built around it." Ronda pressed the key again, listening to the sound. Then she pressed the key next to it and then the one next to that. Each note was different, but they all had the same pure, clean quality. "This is how it starts," Vladimir said. "One note at a time." Ronda turned to look at him. "You really think I can do this?" "I know you can," Vladimir said with complete confidence. "The question is, do you want to?" Ronda looked back at the piano keys. She thought about the empty feeling she had been carrying since retirement. She thought about Vladimir's challenge and the 50 important people who would be watching. She thought about the risk of failing and the possibility of succeeding. "What would I have to do?" she asked. Vladimir smiled. "First, you would have to trust me. I have been teaching piano for 40 years. I know what works and what does not work. If you agree to this, you have to promise to do exactly what I tell you, even if it seems strange or difficult." "Okay," Ronda said slowly. "Second, you would have to practice every day, at least 3 hours a day, maybe more. Learning piano is like training for a fight. You cannot take days off." Ronda nodded. She understood discipline and hard work. "Third," Vladimir continued, "you would have to perform at my concert, in front of 50 people who know more about music than you will ever know. They will be judging every note you play." The thought made Ronda's stomach tighten with nerves. But it also made her feel something else. It made her feel the same excitement she used to feel before a big fight. "And if I mess up?" she asked. "Then you mess up," Vladimir said with a shrug. "But at least you will have tried something new. At least you will have pushed yourself beyond what you thought was possible." Rhonda sat quietly for a long moment, her hands resting on the piano keys. The room was completely silent, except for the distant sound of traffic from the city below. Finally, she turned to Vladimir. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Vladimir's face lit up with joy. "Excellent. We start tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Do not be late." As Rhonda drove home from Vladimir's house, she wondered what she had just gotten herself into. She had agreed to learn piano in 2 weeks and perform in front of experts. It was either the bravest thing she had ever done or the most foolish. But for the first time since retiring from fighting, she felt truly excited about something. She felt like she had a goal again, a challenge that would push her to her limits. She just hoped she was strong enough to meet it. Rhonda arrived at Vladimir's house at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with doubts about what she had agreed to do. As she walked up to the front door, she considered turning around and leaving. But something kept her moving forward. Vladimir opened the door before she could ring the bell. He was dressed in dark pants and a white shirt, looking ready for work. "Perfect timing," he said with a smile. "Are you ready to begin?" "I think so," Rhonda said, though she did not sound convinced. They walked through the house to the piano room. In the morning light, the space looked even more impressive than it had the day before. The big piano sat in the center like a sleeping giant, waiting to be awakened. "Before we start playing," Vladimir said, "I want to know about your musical background. You mentioned yesterday that you took piano lessons as a child?" Rhonda nodded, feeling embarrassed. "Yeah, when I was about 8 years old. My mom thought it would be good for me. But I only did it for about 6 months. Why did you stop?" "I wasn't very good at it," Rhonda said honestly. "And I found martial arts around the same time. Fighting seemed more natural to me." Vladimir walked over to a wall covered with photographs and certificates. There were pictures of him with famous musicians, awards from competitions, and newspaper clippings from concerts all over the world. "Do you know how long it took me to become successful?" he asked. Rhonda looked at the wall of achievements. "I don't know. A long time?" 25 years, Vladimir said. 25 years of practicing every day, of studying with teachers, of performing in small venues before anyone would give me a chance at the big concert halls." He turned to face her. "But you became a world champion in how long?" "About 12 years, Rhonda said. "From when I started training seriously until I won my first UFC title. 12 years to reach the top of one of the most competitive sports in the world," Vladimir said. "That tells me everything I need to know about your ability to learn and improve." They walked over to the piano and Vladimir pulled out the bench. "Sit," he said. Rhonda sat down, placing her hands in her lap. The piano seemed enormous from this angle. "Show me how you sit at a piano," Vladimir said. Rhonda tried to remember her childhood lessons. She straightened her back and put her hands on the keys. "No, no, no," Vladimir said immediately. "Your shoulders are too tense. Your arms are too stiff. You are sitting like you are about to fight the piano, not play it." He demonstrated the correct posture, his body relaxed but alert. "Music comes from your whole body, not just your fingers. You need to be loose and flexible." Rhonda tried to copy his position, but it felt unnatural. Her body was used to being ready for action, not relaxed and flowing. "This is going to be harder than I thought," she said. "Good," Vladimir said. "If it was easy, it would not be worth doing." For the next hour, they worked only on sitting correctly and placing her hands on the keys. Vladimir was incredibly demanding. Every time Rhonda's shoulders tensed up or her wrists dropped, he corrected her. It reminded her of her early martial arts training, where masters would spend entire sessions just on stance and breathing. "Your hands are actually perfect for piano," Vladimir said as he adjusted her finger position. "They are strong, but not too big. Your fingers are long enough to reach all the keys easily." "They don't feel perfect," Rhonda said. "They feel clumsy." "Of course they do," You have trained them to make fists, not to dance on keys. But muscle memory can be retrained. Your hands are smart. They will learn. By the end of the first lesson, Ronda had learned to play 5 notes in sequence. It was not music yet, just a simple pattern that Vladimir had taught her. But when she played it correctly, it sounded clean and clear. "That is enough for today," Vladimir said. "Tomorrow we will add more notes." "That's it?" Ronda asked. "Just 5 notes?" Vladimir looked at her seriously. "In piano, there is no such thing as just 5 notes. Those 5 notes, played correctly, are the foundation for everything else. Master them perfectly, and the rest will follow." As Ronda drove home, she found herself thinking about those 5 notes. She could hear them in her head, and her fingers wanted to move in the pattern Vladimir had taught her. It was a strange feeling. The next morning, she was back at Vladimir's house at 9 o'clock sharp. This time, she felt slightly more confident as she sat at the piano. "Play yesterday's pattern," Vladimir instructed. Ronda played the 5-note sequence. It was not perfect, but it was better than the day before. "Good," Vladimir said. "Now we add 3 more notes." The pattern became longer and more complex. Vladimir showed her how to move her thumb under her other fingers to reach all the keys smoothly. It was awkward at first, but after many repetitions, it started to feel more natural. "What song am I going to learn for the concert?" Ronda asked during a break. "You are not ready to know that yet," Vladimir said. "First, you must build your foundation. Then we will add the music." "But I need to know what I'm working toward," Ronda said. "I need a goal." Vladimir considered this. "Very well. The piece you will perform is called Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. It means moonlight in French. Is it difficult? For a beginner? Very difficult. For someone with your determination and focus? Possible." That afternoon, Ronda went to a music store and bought a recording of Clair de Lune. She listened to it over and over, trying to imagine herself playing those beautiful flowing notes. The music was unlike anything she had ever heard before. It was gentle and peaceful, but also powerful in its own way. By the end of the first week, Ronda could play several simple scales and patterns. Her fingers were starting to move more naturally, across the keys, but she was also frustrated by how slowly she was progressing. "I should be better by now," she complained to Vladimir during one lesson. "How long did it take you to learn your first martial arts technique properly?" Vladimir asked. Ronda thought about it. "Weeks, maybe months to really get it right." "And how long have you been learning piano?" 7 days. Vladimir nodded. "Then you are ahead of schedule." During the second week, Vladimir finally let Ronda hear the full version of Clair de Lune played on his piano. He sat at the bench and placed his hands on the keys. When he began to play, the room filled with the most beautiful music Ronda had ever heard live. The melody was soft and dreamy, like water flowing over smooth stones. Vladimir's hands moved across the keys with perfect grace, each note blending into the next. Ronda watched his fingers dance and tried to imagine her own hands doing the same thing. When the song ended, the room was completely quiet for a long moment. "That's what I'm supposed to play?" Ronda asked in a whisper. "A simplified version," Vladimir said. "But yes, that is the piece." "I can't do that. It's impossible." Vladimir turned to face her. "Do you remember the first time you saw a professional UFC fight?" "Yeah." "Did you think you could do what those fighters were doing?" Ronda considered the question. "No, it looked impossible. But you learned, step by step. You started with basic techniques and built up to advanced ones. This is the same process. Over." The next few days, Vladimir began teaching Ronda the opening notes of Clair de Lune. The melody was much more complex than the simple patterns she had been practicing. Her fingers had to move in new ways, stretching to reach notes that seemed far apart. "I'm not getting it," Ronda said after struggling with the same passage for an hour. You are getting it, Vladimir corrected her. You are just not getting it fast enough for your liking. You are used to learning physical techniques where you can see immediate progress. Music is different. Progress comes in small steps that build on each other. He sat down next to her on the piano bench. Play the first 4 measures again, he said. Ronda played the opening of the song. It was slow and hesitant, with several wrong notes. Now play just the right-hand part, Vladimir instructed. Ronda played only the melody line with her right hand. It was cleaner and more confident. Better. Now just the left hand. The left-hand part was more difficult. It provided the harmony and rhythm that supported the melody. Ronda struggled with it, her fingers stumbling over the unfamiliar patterns. This is the hardest part, Vladimir explained. Your brain has to control both hands independently, making them do completely different things at the same time. Like fighting, Ronda said suddenly. What do you mean? In a fight, I have to think about what my opponent is doing while also controlling my own movements. My hands might be blocking while my feet are moving into position for a kick. It's the same kind of split attention. Vladimir smiled. Exactly. You already know how to do this. You just need to apply that skill to a new activity. By the end of the second week, Ronda could play the first half of Clair de Lune slowly but correctly. It did not sound like Vladimir's beautiful performance, but it was recognizable as the same piece of music. You have made remarkable progress, Vladimir told her on the last day of lessons. It doesn't feel remarkable, Ronda said. It feels like I'm barely hanging on. That is how all the best students feel, Vladimir said. The ones who think they are already good enough never improve. The ones who are never satisfied with their current level are the ones who become great. The night before the concert, Ronda could not sleep. She kept running through the piece in her head, worried about all the places where she might make mistakes. The morning of the third week brought a new intensity to Ronda's piano training. Vladimir had announced that they would now practice for 6 hours each day instead of 3. When Ronda arrived at his house, she found him waiting in the piano room with a serious expression on his face. The concert is in 5 days, he said without any greeting. We are running out of time. From now until then, you must think of nothing but this music. Ronda nodded and sat at the piano bench. She had been expecting this. In her fighting career, the final weeks before a big match were always the most demanding. This felt familiar, even though the challenge was completely different. Play the piece from the beginning, Vladimir instructed. Ronda placed her hands on the keys and began Clair de Lune. The opening notes flowed more smoothly than they had the week before, but Vladimir stopped her after just 16 measures. Your timing is inconsistent, he said. The beauty of this piece comes from its flowing rhythm. It should feel like a gentle breeze, not a series of separate notes. He sat beside her on the bench and played the same passage. His version had a natural pulse that made the melody seem to breathe. Feel the music in your body, he said. Do not just play the notes. Become the music. This was the hardest concept for Ronda to understand. As a fighter, she had learned to control her body with precision and power. But music required a different kind of control, one that was more about feeling than force. They worked on rhythm for 2 hours, using a metronome that clicked steadily while Ronda played. Vladimir made her practice the same passages over and over until the timing became automatic. Music and fighting are more similar than you think, Vladimir said during a short break. In both, timing is everything. A punch thrown too early or too late will miss its target. A note played too early or too late will destroy the music. But in fighting, timing is about reacting to your opponent, Ronda said. In music, there's no opponent. Is there not? Vladimir asked with a small smile. What about your own doubts? What about your fear of making mistakes? What about the voice in your head that tells you this is impossible? Ronda had not thought about it that way. But Vladimir was right. Learning piano was like fighting against her own limitations. The afternoon session focused on dynamics, which meant playing some notes louder and others softer to create expression. This was even more difficult than timing. Ronda's hands wanted to play every note with the same strength. "You are still thinking like a fighter," Vladimir observed. "You are attacking every note with full force. But music needs light and shadow, loud and soft, tension and release." He demonstrated by playing a phrase first with all notes at the same volume, then with subtle changes in loudness. The second version was dramatically more beautiful. "How do you know which notes to play louder?" Ronda asked. "You feel it?" Vladimir said. "The music tells you what it needs, but first you must learn to listen." This concept frustrated Ronda more than anything else. She was used to learning through clear, logical steps. In martial arts, there were specific techniques with specific applications, but music seemed to require an intuitive understanding that she struggled to grasp. By the fourth day of intensive practice, Ronda's fingers were sore and her back ached from sitting at the piano for hours. But something was beginning to change in her playing. The notes were starting to connect in a way that created actual phrases instead of just individual sounds. "Better," Vladimir said after she played through the entire piece. "You are beginning to make music instead of just hitting keys." "It still doesn't sound like your version," Ronda said. "Of course not. My version comes from 40 years of experience. Your version comes from 2.5 weeks. But your version has something that mine does not have." "What's that?" "Surprise," Vladimir said. "When people hear you play, they will not expect it to be beautiful. That surprise will make them listen more carefully. Sometimes being unexpected is more powerful than being perfect." On the final day of preparation, Vladimir invited a small audience to hear Ronda play. 3 of his friends came to the house, all professional musicians who had worked with Vladimir for many years. "I want you to experience performing for people before tomorrow night," Vladimir explained. "Playing alone is different from playing for an audience." Ronda felt nervous as she sat at the piano with the 3 strangers watching her. Her hands were slightly shaky as she placed them on the keys. "Just breathe," Vladimir said quietly. "Remember, the music wants to be played. You are just helping it come to life." Ronda began, Clair de Lune. The first few measures were tentative, but as she continued, she began to lose herself in the music. She thought about the moonlight that the piece was meant to represent. She imagined gentle waves on a quiet lake. She let the melody flow through her fingers instead of forcing it. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the 3 musicians began to applaud. "Remarkable," said one of them, an elderly woman who played violin. "I have never heard anyone make such progress in so little time." "The technique is still developing," said another, "but the musical instinct is already there." The third musician, a man about Vladimir's age, shook his head in amazement. "If I had not seen it myself, I would not have believed it possible. She plays like someone who has been studying for years, not weeks." After the musicians left, Vladimir and Ronda sat quietly in the piano room. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the floor. "How do you feel?" Vladimir asked. "Scared," Ronda said honestly, "but also excited. I can't believe how much I've learned in such a short time." "You have learned much more than piano technique," Vladimir said. "You have learned that you can do things you never thought possible. You have learned that strength comes in many forms." He walked over to the wall of photographs and pointed to a picture of himself as a young man, sitting at a piano on a concert stage. "That was my first major performance," he said. "I was 28 years old and I was terrified. I had been playing piano for 20 years, but I still thought I might fail." "Did you make any mistakes?" Ronda asked. "Several," Vladimir said, with a laugh. "But the audience did not care. They heard the music, not the mistakes. That is what you must remember tomorrow night. That evening, Rhonda went home and tried to relax, but her mind would not stop racing. She kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if she forgot the music? What if her hands froze up? What if the audience laughed at her? She called Vladimir around 10 o'clock. "I don't think I can do this," she said when he answered the phone. "I'm not ready." "Do you remember how you felt before your first UFC fight?" Vladimir asked. Rhonda thought. Back to that night several years ago. "I was terrified. I thought I might get knocked out in the first round." "But you fought anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Rhonda considered the question. "Because I had trained as hard as I could. Because I believed in my preparation. And because I knew I would regret it forever if I didn't try." "Tomorrow night is no different," Vladimir said. "You have trained as hard as anyone could in the time we had. You have learned more than I thought possible. And if you do not perform tomorrow night, you will always wonder what might have happened." After they hung up, Rhonda felt calmer. Vladimir was right. She had given everything she had to this challenge. Whether she succeeded or failed, she would know that she had not held anything back. She went to bed early and, surprisingly, slept well. In her dreams, she was playing Clair de Lune in a beautiful concert hall filled with people who were listening with wonder and appreciation. Her hands moved effortlessly across the keys, and the music flowed like water. When she woke up next morning, the day of the concert, she felt ready. Not confident exactly, but ready. She had spent 3 weeks discovering a new part of herself. Tonight, she would share that discovery with the world. She spent the morning reviewing the piece. One final time at Vladimir's house. Her playing was not perfect, but it was musical. It had heart and soul, even if the technique was still developing. "Remember," Vladimir said as they finished the final practice session, "you are not performing for the critics or the experts. You are performing for the music itself. Play it the way it wants to be played, and everything else will take care of itself." As the afternoon turned to evening, Rhonda prepared for the most unusual performance of her life. In a few hours, she would sit at a concert grand piano in front of 50 of the most knowledgeable music lovers in Los Angeles. She would play a piece she had learned in 3 weeks, a piece that usually took students months or years to master. It was either going to be a triumph or a disaster, but either way, it was going to be unforgettable. Something remarkable happened during the final week of Rhonda's piano training. What had started as a desperate attempt to learn enough notes to get through one song was becoming something much deeper and more meaningful. It began on a Tuesday morning when Rhonda arrived at Vladimir's house for what she thought would be another grueling practice session. She had been working on Clair de Lune for almost 3 weeks now, and while she could play all the notes correctly, something was still missing. "Today we do something different," Vladimir announced when she sat down at the piano bench. "Different? How?" Rhonda asked. "Today you stop thinking about the notes and start thinking about the story." Vladimir pulled up a chair next to the piano. "Close your eyes," he said. "I want you to imagine that you are sitting by a lake at night. The moon is full and its light is dancing on the water. There is a gentle breeze, and you can hear small waves lapping against the shore." Rhonda closed her eyes and tried to picture the scene Vladimir was describing. "Now," Vladimir continued, "play the opening of the piece, but do not think about which keys to press. Think about the moonlight on the water." Rhonda placed her hands on the keys and began to play. At first, it sounded much the same as it always did. But as she continued, something started to change. The notes began to flow together in a way they never had before. Instead of playing individual sounds, she was creating a mood, a feeling. When she finished the opening section, she opened her eyes. Vladimir was smiling. "That," he said, "was music." "It felt different," Rhonda admitted. "Like the piano was playing itself and I was just helping." "Exactly." You have been so focused on getting the notes right that you forgot why the notes exist. They exist to create beauty, to tell a story, to make people feel something. From that day forward, Rhonda's relationship with the piano changed completely. Instead of fighting against the instrument, she began to work with it. Instead of forcing the music out, she began to let it flow naturally. Vladimir noticed the change immediately. "Your hands are relaxing," he observed during one lesson. "You are not gripping the keys anymore. You are caressing them." It was true. Rhonda's hands, which had been trained for years to form fists and deliver powerful strikes, were learning a completely different kind of strength. This was not the strength to destroy, but the strength to create. It was not the strength to overpower, but the strength to express. "I never knew my hands could do this," Rhonda said one afternoon after playing through a particularly beautiful passage. "Your hands are the same hands you have always had," Vladimir replied. "What has changed is your understanding of what strength means." As the days passed, Rhonda found herself thinking about music even when she was not at the piano. She would wake up in the morning with melodies in her head. She would find herself tapping out rhythms on the steering wheel of her car. She would notice sounds around her in a way she never had before. The rhythm of her footsteps, the melody of birds singing, the harmony of traffic in the distance. "I think I'm becoming obsessed," she told Vladimir one day. "Good," he replied. "Obsession is the beginning of mastery." Vladimir began to teach her about the composer who had written Clair de Lune. Claude Debussy was a French musician who had lived more than 100 years ago. He was known for creating music that painted pictures with sound, music that was more about feeling and atmosphere than about technical complexity. "Debussy was a revolutionary," Vladimir explained. "He broke the rules of traditional classical music. He created new ways of combining notes, new ways of expressing emotion." "Like I'm breaking the rules by learning this so fast?" Rhonda asked. "Exactly. Most piano teachers would say it is impossible to learn this piece in 3 weeks, but you are. Proof that sometimes the impossible is just the untried." As Rhonda's playing improved, Vladimir began to push her in new directions. He taught her to play with more expression, to make some notes sing out while others whispered. He showed her how to use the pedals to create different textures and colors in the sound. "Music is like painting," he explained. "You can use bright colors or soft colors, bold brush strokes or delicate ones. The same notes can sound completely different depending on how you play them." One afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Rhonda was practicing a particularly difficult section of the piece when she suddenly stopped playing. "What's wrong?" Vladimir asked. "I can hear it," Rhonda said with wonder in her voice. "I can hear the whole piece in my head, not just the notes. I'm playing, but all the notes together like a conversation between my two hands." Vladimir nodded knowingly. "That is musical thinking. You are not just learning to move your fingers anymore. You are learning to think in music." This new understanding transformed Rhonda's playing once again. She began to anticipate where the melody was going instead of just reacting to each note as it came. She started to feel the natural ebb and flow of the piece, the way some sections built tension while others provided release. "It's like fighting," she realized one day. "In a fight, you have to think several moves ahead. You have to feel the rhythm of the match, know when to attack and when to defend. This is the same thing, just with music instead of punches." Vladimir was delighted by this insight. "Music and martial arts are both about timing, balance, and flow," he agreed. "The best fighters move like dancers. The best musicians play like athletes." During the final week of preparation, Vladimir invited his housekeeper, Maria, to listen to Rhonda play. Maria had worked for Vladimir for 15 years and had heard countless students practice in the piano room. "Play for Maria," Vladimir said. "She has excellent musical instincts, even though she is not a trained musician." Rhonda felt nervous playing for someone new, but she began Clair de Lune with growing confidence. As she played, she noticed that Maria's eyes closed and a peaceful expression came over her face. When the music ended, Maria opened her eyes with tears in them. "Beautiful," she said in her accented English. "Very, very beautiful, like my grandmother used to sing to me when I was little." After Maria left the room, Vladimir turned to Ronda with a serious expression. "Do you understand what just happened?" he asked. "She liked my playing? More than that, you moved her. You made her remember something precious from her childhood. That is what music is supposed to do. It is supposed to touch people's hearts and remind them of things they had forgotten." Ronda felt a new sense of responsibility. She was not just learning to play notes anymore. She was learning to communicate with people through sound, to share emotions and memories and beauty. "I never thought about music that way," she said. "I always thought it was just entertainment." "Entertainment is the smallest part of what music can do," Vladimir replied. "Music can heal, inspire, comfort, and transform. It can bring people together across all barriers of language and culture. When you play tomorrow night, you will not just be performing a piece of music. You will be sharing a part of your soul. That evening, as Ronda practiced alone in the piano room while Vladimir prepared dinner, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. 3 weeks ago, she had been a retired fighter looking for purpose. Now she was discovering talents and feelings she never knew she possessed. Her hands moved across the keys with newfound grace and confidence. The music flowed from her fingers like water from a spring, natural and effortless. She was no longer fighting the piano or fighting the music. She was dancing with it, partnering with it, becoming one with it. When Vladimir returned to the piano room, he found Ronda playing with her eyes closed, completely lost in the music. He stood quietly in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt what he was witnessing. This was no longer a student struggling to learn a difficult piece. This was a musician expressing something beautiful and true. In 3 weeks, Ronda had not just learned to play piano, she had discovered a new language for her heart and soul. As the final notes of Clair de Lune faded into silence, Ronda opened her eyes and found Vladimir watching her with pride and amazement. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, "you are going to astonish everyone, including yourself." The day of the concert arrived with perfect Los Angeles weather. The sun was shining, and there was a gentle breeze that reminded Ronda of the peaceful feeling she tried to capture when playing Clair de Lune. But despite the beautiful day, she woke up with butterflies in her stomach. She had been in many high-pressure situations before. She had fought in front of thousands of screaming fans, with millions more watching on television. She had faced opponents who wanted to hurt her, in situations where one mistake could end her career. But somehow, the thought of playing piano for 50 people terrified her more than any of that. Vladimir had told her to arrive at his house at 5 o'clock in the evening. The concert would begin at 7, giving her time to warm up and get comfortable. With the piano before the guests arrived, Ronda spent the morning trying to stay calm. She went for a light jog, did some stretching, and ate a healthy breakfast. She tried to practice her usual pre-competition routine, but it felt strange to prepare for a piano performance the same way she had prepared for fights. At 3 o'clock, her phone rang. It was Vladimir. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Nervous," Ronda admitted. "Really nervous?" "Good. If you were not nervous, it would mean this did not matter to you. Nervousness means you care." "What if I mess up? What if I forget the music? What if my hands shake?" Vladimir was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what I told you on the first day we met?" "You said a lot of things. I said that you had more focus and discipline than most people I had ever met. I said that your hands were perfect. Do you believe that was true?" Ronda thought about the past 3 weeks. She thought about all the hours of practice, all the small improvements, all the moments when the music had felt magical under her fingers. "Yes," she said, "I think it was true." "Then trust that. Trust your preparation, trust your instincts, and most importantly, trust the music." When Rhonda arrived at Vladimir's house, she was surprised to see several trucks parked outside. Workers were carrying chairs and music stands through the front door. "What's all this?" she asked Vladimir when she found him supervising the setup. "I am turning the piano room into a proper concert hall," he explained. "The guests deserve the best possible experience." Rhonda walked into the piano room and gasped. The space had been completely transformed. Rows of elegant chairs faced the piano with soft lighting that made everything look warm and intimate. There were flowers on small tables around the room, and the big windows overlooking the city had been covered with curtains to create a more formal atmosphere. But what struck Rhonda most was how small and exposed the piano looked in the center of all those chairs. In a few hours, she would be sitting there, alone, with 50 pairs of eyes watching her every move. "It looks amazing," she said, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Sit down and play," Vladimir said. "Get comfortable with how it feels in the new setup." Rhonda sat at the piano bench and adjusted it to the right height. The room sounded different with all the chairs and decorations. The acoustics were warmer, more intimate than before. She began to play Clair de Lune, starting softly as Vladimir had taught her. The music filled the transformed space beautifully, and she began to feel more confident. "Perfect," Vladimir said when she finished. "The sound is exactly what I hoped for." At 6 o'clock, the catering staff arrived with food and drinks for before and after the performance. Vladimir had planned everything carefully: champagne and elegant appetizers, the kind of refreshments served at the finest concert halls. "Are you trying to make this more intimidating?" Rhonda asked as she watched the staff set up silver trays and crystal glasses. "I am trying to make it special," Vladimir replied. "This is not just a casual performance. This is a celebration of what you have accomplished." At 6:30, the first guests began to arrive. Rhonda watched from an upstairs window as expensive cars pulled up to the house. People in formal clothes stepped out, men in dark suits, women in elegant dresses. They all looked sophisticated and important, the kind of people who knew everything there was to know about classical music. "I can't do this," Rhonda said, turning away from the window. Vladimir found her sitting on a couch in his study, her head in her hands. "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "You have already done the hard part. You have learned the music. Everything else is just sharing what you have learned. But look at those people. They probably started playing piano when they were 5 years old. They've been to hundreds of concerts. They know what real piano playing sounds like." Vladimir sat down next to her. "Do you know what those people have never heard before?" "What?" "They have never heard someone discover music for the first time as an adult. They have never heard someone bring the intensity and focus of a world-class athlete to piano playing. They have never heard your story told through music." He stood up and offered her his hand. "Come. It is time." Rhonda took his hand and let him lead her downstairs. She could hear the murmur of conversation from the piano room, mixed with the soft clinking of glasses and the rustle of programs. "Wait, here," Vladimir said, leaving her in the hallway outside the piano room. Through the doorway, Rhonda could see the audience. The chairs were nearly full, and people were still finding their seats. She recognized some faces from photos she had seen in music magazines, famous composers, conductors, and performers. There were also people she assumed were wealthy collectors and patrons of the arts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vladimir's voice called out, and the room gradually became quiet. "Thank you all for joining me tonight for what I promise will be a very special evening." Rhonda listened as Vladimir began his introduction. He talked about the relationship between different art forms, about the discipline required to master any skill, about the courage it takes to try something completely new. "Tonight," Vladimir continued, "you will hear a performance that breaks every rule about how music should be learned and when it should be shared. 3 weeks ago, the woman you are about to hear had not touched a piano in over 20 years. What she has accomplished in that short time will challenge everything you think you know about musical education and natural talent. The room was completely silent now. Ronda could feel the audience's curiosity and skepticism in equal measure. Please welcome Ronda Rousey. This was it. There was no turning back now. Ronda took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the piano room. The audience applauded politely as she made her way to the piano bench. Some people looked surprised. They had heard her name but were not expecting to see the famous fighter in person. Others looked curious about what they were about to witness. Ronda sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench, just as she had practiced. She looked out at the audience for a moment, seeing their expectant faces. Some looked encouraging, others looked doubtful. A few appeared to be trying not to smile, as if they were expecting to be entertained by a novelty act rather than a serious musical performance. Vladimir gave her a small nod from the side of the room. It was time to begin. Ronda placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment, trying to find the calm center that Vladimir had taught her to access. She thought about moonlight on water, about the gentle breeze that had inspired Debussy's beautiful composition. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Clair de Lune filled the room, soft and delicate. Ronda felt the familiar comfort of the melody under her fingers, but there was something different about playing for an audience. The music seemed to take on a life of its own, as if it wanted to reach out and touch each person in the room. As she continued through the piece, Ronda became aware that the atmosphere in the room was changing. The polite attention of the audience was transforming into something deeper. People were leaning forward in their chairs, their expressions shifting from curiosity to genuine engagement. Ronda lost herself in the music, forgetting about the audience, forgetting about her nervousness, forgetting about everything except the beautiful melody flowing from her fingers. This was the moment she had been preparing for, and somehow it felt exactly right. As Ronda's fingers moved across the piano keys, something magical began to happen in Vladimir's transformed piano room. The soft opening notes of Clair de Lune floated through the air like gentle whispers, immediately capturing the attention of every person in the audience. The first thing that struck the listeners was not technical perfection, but something much more rare and precious, genuine emotion. Ronda's interpretation of the famous piece carried a rawness and honesty that made people sit up and take notice. This was not the polished performance of a conservatory student. This was something else entirely. In the front row, Margaret Chen, a music critic for the Los Angeles Times, found herself forgetting to take notes. She had come expecting to write a humorous piece about a publicity stunt gone wrong. Instead, she was hearing something that made her remember why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Ronda's hands, which had once been weapons, in the octagon, now moved with surprising grace and sensitivity across the keys. Her technique was far from perfect. A trained ear could hear the places where her fingering was not quite smooth, where her rhythm wavered slightly. But what came through most powerfully was her complete commitment to the music. She played as if her life depended on it. Every note mattered to her. Every phrase was delivered with the same intensity she had once brought to her athletic competitions. The audience could feel her pouring her heart into the performance, holding nothing back. About halfway through the piece, something even more remarkable happened. Ronda found a passage that she had struggled with during practice, a delicate section, where the melody weaves between the hands in a complex pattern. Instead of tensing up as she had feared she might, she relaxed completely and let her instincts guide her. The music that emerged was breathtaking. Her interpretation of this passage was unlike anything the experienced listeners had heard before. Where most pianists played it with careful precision, Ronda played it with the fluid power of an athlete at the peak of performance. It was as if she was discovering the music for the first time, right there in front of the audience. Dr. James Morrison, a piano professor from UCLA who had been skeptical when Vladimir invited him, found himself leaning forward in his chair. He had taught piano for 30 years and had heard thousands of students play this exact piece. But he had never heard anyone bring such raw authenticity to Debussy's delicate composition. The transformation happening in the room was visible. Audience members who had arrived with polite smiles and low expectations were now completely absorbed in the performance. Some had tears in their eyes. Others were holding their breath, afraid to disturb the spell that Ronda was weaving with her music. Vladimir watched from the side of the room, his own eyes moist with emotion. He had believed in Ronda's potential from the beginning, but he was amazed by what he was witnessing. In 3 weeks, she had not just learned to play piano, she had discovered how to speak through music, how to communicate feelings that had no words. As Ronda approached the climax of the piece, the most technically demanding section, her concentration deepened even further. This was the part she had been most worried about, where the melody soars to its highest point while the left hand provides complex harmonic support. But instead of playing it safely, holding back to avoid mistakes, Ronda threw herself into it, completely. She played with the fearlessness of a champion, taking risks that even experienced pianists might avoid. Some of the risks paid off brilliantly, creating moments of startling beauty. Others resulted in small imperfections that somehow made the performance more human and touching. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. Cell phones remained in purses and pockets. Programs stayed unruffled. Even the catering. Staff had stopped what they were doing to listen from the kitchen doorway. Anna Kowalski, a concert pianist who had performed in the world's greatest concert halls, watched Ronda's hands with fascination. The technical training was obviously limited, but the musical intelligence was extraordinary. Ronda seemed to understand instinctively how to shape phrases, how to build tension and release it, how to make the piano sing. "She plays like someone who has been making music her whole life," Anna whispered to her companion. "Just not necessarily on piano." As the piece moved toward its gentle conclusion, Ronda's playing became even more expressive. The final section of Clair de Lune is marked by Debussy to be played very softly, like a whisper or a sigh. Most students struggle with this because playing softly while maintaining clear tone is one of the most difficult techniques in piano playing. But Ronda's athletic training served her well here. Her strong hands could control the keys with precise, gentle pressure. The soft notes that emerged were crystalline and pure, floating through the room like moonbeams. The ending of the piece requires the performer to gradually slow down and fade away, like moonlight slowly disappearing behind clouds. Ronda played these final measures with such tenderness and sensitivity that several audience members found themselves holding their breath. When the last note finally faded into silence, the room remained completely quiet for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then, as if a dam had burst, the audience erupted into applause. But this was not the polite, obligatory applause that often greets amateur performances. This was the kind of enthusiastic, genuine appreciation usually reserved for professional concerts. People were not just clapping their hands, they were rising to their feet, some with tears streaming down their faces. Margaret Chen, the music critic, was applauding so vigorously that her program fell to the floor. Dr. Morrison was shaking his head in amazement, muttering, "Incredible, simply incredible," under his breath. Anna Kowalski was wiping her eyes with a tissue, completely overcome by what she had just heard. Ronda sat at the piano bench, looking stunned by the response. She had expected polite acknowledgement at best, perhaps some kind comments about her effort. She had not expected this overwhelming wave of genuine appreciation. Vladimir made his way through the applauding crowd to the piano. His face was beaming with pride and joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the continuing applause, What you have just witnessed is proof that music lives in the human spirit, waiting to be awakened. 3 weeks ago, Ronda Rousey was a retired athlete. Tonight, she is a musician. The applause grew even louder. Several people called out, "Bravo" and "Magnificent." Ronda looked out at the audience, seeing faces filled with warmth, respect, and genuine admiration. She had feared that these sophisticated music lovers would see through her limited training and focus on her mistakes. Instead, they had heard something that touched their hearts and reminded them of the power of music to transform and inspire. As the applause finally began to die down, Ronda stood up from the piano bench. She felt different than she had when she sat down just minutes earlier. She felt like she had discovered a new part of herself, a capacity for beauty and expression that she never knew existed. The transformation was complete. The retired fighter had become a musician, not through years of traditional training, but through courage, determination, and an open heart. And the shocked piano room would never forget the night when everything they thought they knew about learning music was turned upside down. The applause continued for what felt like forever, but Ronda was no longer nervous or overwhelmed. Standing next to the piano, where she had just created something beautiful, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment that was different from any victory she had experienced in her fighting career. When the clapping finally died down, people began to approach the piano area. Instead of the polite but distant congratulations she had expected, Ronda found herself surrounded by genuinely moved listeners who wanted to share their reactions. "That was extraordinary," said Dr. Morrison, the UCLA piano professor, extending his hand for a handshake. "I have been teaching piano for 30 years, and I have never heard a performance quite like that. You brought something to the music that cannot be taught." Margaret Chen, the music critic, was next. "I came here tonight expecting to write about an interesting publicity stunt," she admitted. "Instead, I witnessed something that has completely changed my understanding of what it means to be musical. Your performance was deeply moving." One by one, the audience members shared their reactions. Some talked about the technical aspects of her playing that had impressed them. Others focused on the emotional impact of her interpretation. But the common theme was amazement, not just at what Ronda had accomplished in 3 weeks, but at the genuine musicality she had displayed. Anna Kowalski, the concert pianist, had perhaps the most insightful comment. "You played like someone who understands that music is not about showing off or following rules," she said. "You played like someone who knows that music is about communication, about sharing something true and beautiful with other people." Vladimir watched these interactions with deep satisfaction. He had known that Ronda could learn to play the notes correctly, but even he had not been certain that she would be able to connect with an audience of sophisticated listeners. Now he was seeing proof that his instincts had been correct. As the evening progressed and people enjoyed the elegant refreshments, conversations began to develop around what they had just witnessed. The performance had clearly sparked discussions about musical education, natural talent, and the relationship between different forms of artistic expression. "It makes me reconsider everything I thought I knew about when and how people can learn music," one guest commented to another. "If someone can develop that level of musical sensitivity in 3 weeks, what does that say about our traditional teaching methods?" Ronda found herself at the center of these discussions, but not in an uncomfortable way. People were genuinely curious about her experience, asking thoughtful questions about how she had approached learning piano and what connections she had found between music and athletics. "The biggest surprise for me," Ronda told a small group of listeners, "was discovering that my hands could create beauty instead of just winning fights. I never knew that strength could be gentle, that power could be used to make something delicate and meaningful." Vladimir overheard this comment and smiled. This was exactly the kind of insight he had hoped she would gain from the experience. As the formal part of the evening wound down, several unexpected things began to happen. Dr. Morrison, approached Rhonda with a serious expression. "I would like to invite you to perform with our university piano ensemble," he said. "We do several community outreach concerts each year, and I think your story and your musical voice would inspire many people." Margaret Chen had a different kind of offer. "I would love to write a feature story about your musical journey," she said. "Not just about tonight's performance, but about the whole process of discovering music as an adult. I think it could inspire many people who have always thought it was too late for them to try something new." But the most meaningful moment came when a young girl, about 10 years old, approached Rhonda with her parents. The family had been guests of one of Vladimir's longtime supporters. "My mom says you just started learning piano," the girl said shyly. "Is that really true?" "Yes, it is," Rhonda replied, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. "Just 3 weeks ago." The girl's eyes widened. "I've been taking lessons for 2 years, but I don't sound like that when I play. How did you learn so fast?" Rhonda thought carefully about how to answer. "I think the most important thing was that I really wanted to learn. And I had an amazing teacher who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." The girl nodded seriously. "Will you keep playing piano now?" It was a question that Rhonda herself had been wondering about all evening. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I definitely will." As the guests began to leave, many of them stopped to thank Vladimir for organizing such an unusual and memorable evening. Several mentioned that they would never forget what they had witnessed. "This is why I love music," one elderly composer told Vladimir as he was leaving. "Just when you think you understand everything about it, something like this happens to remind you that music is full of mysteries and surprises." When the last guest had departed and the catering staff had finished cleaning up, Rhonda and Vladimir found themselves alone in the piano room. The chairs had been cleared away, and the space looked much as it had when Rhonda first saw it 3 weeks earlier. "How do you feel?" Vladimir asked. Rhonda sat down on the piano bench and placed her hands gently on the keys. "Different," she said, "like I discovered a part of myself that I never knew existed." She played a few measures of Clair de Lune softly, just for herself and Vladimir. Even after the intensity of the evening's performance, the music still felt natural under her fingers. "What happens now?" she asked. Vladimir pulled up a chair next to the piano. "Now you decide what you want to do with what you have learned. You could continue taking lessons and expand your repertoire. You could perform more often. You could teach others. Or you could simply play for your own enjoyment." "I think I want to do all of those things," Rhonda said, "but especially the teaching part. Tonight made me realize that there might be other people like me, people who think they're too old or too different to learn music." Vladimir nodded approvingly. "That is a wonderful idea. You could reach people that traditional music teachers never could." Over the following weeks, word of Rhonda's remarkable performance spread throughout the classical music community and beyond. Margaret Chen's article in the Los Angeles Times was picked up by news outlets around the world. Videos of the performance, recorded by some of the guests, went viral on social media. But more importantly, Rhonda began to receive messages from people who had been inspired by her story. Retired athletes who wanted to try music, older adults who had always dreamed of learning piano, parents who wondered if their children were capable of more than they had imagined. 3 months after the concert, Rhonda announced the creation of the Second Act Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing music education to people who wanted to start learning as adults. Vladimir agreed to serve as the artistic director, and several of the musicians who had attended the concert volunteered to teach. The foundation's first class included a retired police officer, a grandmother who had raised 5 children, a former construction worker, and a nurse who had always dreamed of playing piano. Rhonda worked with each of them, sharing not just technical knowledge, but the confidence and determination that had made her own transformation possible. "Music doesn't care how old you are or what you did before," she would tell her students. Music only cares that you're willing to open your heart and let it in. A year after her debut performance, Ronda gave her second public concert, this time featuring her adult students alongside her own playing. The audience included many of the same people who had witnessed her first performance, and they were amazed to see how much her playing had continued to develop. But what moved them most was watching her students, each of whom had discovered their own musical voice under her guidance. The retired police officer played a gentle jazz standard. The grandmother performed a classical piece by Mozart. The construction worker had learned to play blues piano with remarkable feeling. Vladimir watched, from the audience with tears in his eyes. What had begun as an experiment to prove a point about musical potential had become something much larger and more meaningful. After the concert, as Ronda was packing up her music, she found a note that someone had left on the piano bench. It was from the 10-year-old girl who had spoken to her at the first concert. "Dear Ms. Rousey," the note read, "thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start something new. I'm going to keep playing piano, and maybe someday I'll be brave enough to try something completely different too. You taught me that. Music is about being brave and sharing your heart." Ronda folded the note carefully and put it in her purse. It was the perfect reminder of why she had taken Vladimir's impossible challenge in the first place, and why she would keep playing piano for the rest of her life. The piano room that had once been Vladimir's private sanctuary had become something much more significant. It had become the birthplace of a movement that proved music belongs to everyone, regardless of age, background, or previous experience. And it all started with a famous pianist's crazy idea and a retired fighter's willingness to try something new. In the end, Ronda's transformation from fighter to musician was complete not when she finished her first performance,